Lucas, an experienced hiker, stood at the entrance of the trail, his flashlight cutting through the dense fog that blanketed the mountain. The forest around him was unnervingly silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves, as though something unseen lurked nearby. Every tree seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward him, and the deeper he ventured, the darker the path became. There was a weight to the air, a damp, oppressive heaviness that pressed down on him, chilling his skin despite the mild weather. As he moved further, his boots sinking into the soft earth, he began to notice signs that something was wrong. Footprints, faint but unmistakable, marked the mud ahead. They appeared fresh, too fresh, as though someone had walked there just moments before. His pulse quickened. These weren't the signs of a casual wanderer. The tracks were deep and staggered, as if the person had been dragging themselves along, desperate or wounded. Lucas hesitated, his instincts telling him to turn back, but a strange compulsion drove him forward, as if the trail itself were urging him to discover its secrets. Suddenly, he heard it, a faint, distant whisper that seemed to drift through the fog, echoing off the trees. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer, forming words he could almost make out. "Help, please." The voice was weak, strained, and yet it echoed with a sense of hopelessness that sent a shiver down his spine. Lucas called out, his voice swallowed by the fog, but there was no response. Only silence, thick and consuming, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. He took a few cautious steps forward, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the mist. And then, through the haze, he saw it, a figure standing motionless further down the trail. Cloaked in shadow, the person's outline was faint, ghostly, as if they were barely there at all. Lucas squinted, trying to make out details, but the fog seemed to cling to the figure, obscuring their face and body. All he could see was the faint, pallid glow of a face partially turned in his direction. The figure lifted a hand slowly, almost mechanically, beckoning him forward. Lucas's heart thundered in his chest as a wave of cold dread washed over him. There was something deeply wrong with the figure, something unnatural. Every instinct screamed for him to turn around, but he felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and curiosity. He took a hesitant step forward, his breath fogging in the frigid air. The figure remained silent, its hands still raised, a dark void where its eyes should have been. As he drew closer, the figure began to dissolve, fading into the mist like smoke, until there was nothing left but the empty trail and the silence. Lucas's skin prickled with unease. Had he imagined it? Was the isolation playing tricks on his mind? But the footprints remained, leading further into the forest, marking a path towards something unknown and deeply, terribly wrong. Just as he began to turn away, a soft whisper brushed against his ear. Too close, too real. "Don't leave." It was no longer a plea but a command, laced with something dark and possessive. As Lucas stood on the eerily silent trail, the oppressive fog swirling around him, an old, buried memory clawed its way to the surface. Years ago, on this very mountain, he had watched his older brother, Daniel, disappear into the mist, his last words a whispered promise to return. Lucas had been young, too young to fully understand the fear that gripped him as he waited alone, the daylight fading, his brother never coming back. Now, standing in the same place, he felt the echo of that terror, a chill settling deep within his bones. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn, faded photograph, the only memento he had left of Daniel, taken just a day before he vanished. The photograph showed his brother smiling, carefree, his arm draped over Lucas's shoulders. But as he stared at the image now, something seemed off. Daniel's face, which he remembered as warm and familiar, looked strangely distorted. Shadows clung to his features, and his eyes, usually bright and full of life, appeared hollow, empty, as if the essence of him had been drained away. Lucas felt his chest tighten, a growing unease crawling up his spine. It was as if the photograph itself had absorbed some darkness from that fateful day, as if his brother's spirit was trying to warn him from within the ink and paper. Suddenly, a faint glint caught his eye, pulling him from the photograph. Just off the trail, buried partially under a layer of damp leaves and dirt, lay a small object. Lucas knelt down and brushed it clean with trembling fingers, revealing a silver pendant, a locket his brother had always worn. He remembered Daniel clutching it tightly, as though it held some secret meaning. Seeing it here, abandoned, in the middle of nowhere, filled Lucas with a sickening dread. This was impossible. His brother's body was never found, and no belongings had ever been recovered. Yet here it was, unmistakably Daniel's locket, lying as if dropped in haste, or left as a sign. He picked up the locket, his fingers shaking, and held it close, feeling its cold weight. As he opened it, hoping for some explanation, he found only an empty space where a photograph should have been. But then, faintly, he smelled something familiar, a trace of cologne mixed with the unmistakable metallic scent of blood. The smell was subtle, yet it lingered, invasive, seeping into his mind. Memories of that day flooded back, twisted and unclear. Had he really seen his brother disappear? Or had he simply turned away, too afraid to watch as something unspeakable took him? The fog thickened around him, seeming to press closer, as if the forest itself wanted to hide the truth. A whisper floated through the air, barely audible, but clear enough to freeze Lucas in place. "Why did you let me go?" The voice was unmistakably Daniel's, but it was different, distorted, filled with a bitterness that cut through the silence like a knife. Lucas's mind reeled. He wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but he found himself rooted to the spot, gripped by an inexplicable guilt, as though he had abandoned his brother all those years ago. He clutched the locket tighter, feeling its metal edge dig into his skin, grounding him in the present, yet pulling him deeper into the past. He was trapped between worlds, reliving that day, the helplessness, the suffocating fear, and the lingering question that had haunted him for years. What really happened to Daniel? The forest seemed to close in around him, branches whispering secrets, and as the locket grew colder in his palm, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever had taken his brother was still here, watching, waiting, and now it wanted him too. As Lucas moved deeper into the forest, he felt the weight of Daniel's locket pressing against his chest, a cold reminder of the past that now seemed to pull him further into an invisible web of fear and regret. His flashlight flickered as he stumbled along the narrowing path, and the shadows grew darker, denser, as though something sinister was drawing all light away. He could feel the forest changing around him, twisting into something foreign and alive, each step echoing the subtle beat of his own anxious heartbeat. Then the whispers began again, this time louder, swirling through the fog, surrounding him from every direction. The voice, chillingly familiar yet unnervingly distorted, murmured his name. Lucas. The sound seemed to crawl through his mind, planting seeds of dread as it grew clearer, more insistent. And then came the words that froze him in place. "Come closer, or you'll never know the truth." It was Daniel's voice, but it carried an edge of darkness, as though it had been twisted by whatever malevolent force lurked here. Lucas gripped the locket, feeling his pulse throbbing beneath his skin, his mind waging a war between logic and fear. Every rational part of him screamed to turn back, to escape this nightmare. But the guilt of abandoning Daniel once again chained him to the spot, forcing him to listen. Then, as the mist began to thin in patches, he saw something emerge, a figure standing alone, its head bowed, hands hanging lifelessly at its sides. The figure looked almost human, but something about its stance, its stillness, was deeply unsettling. Lucas took a step forward, his movements slow, and then the figure lifted its head, revealing a face he knew all too well. Daniel, or what was left of him. The eyes, once warm and familiar, were now hollow, reflecting a dark, empty abyss, and his skin held a sickly pallor, almost translucent under the faint beam of the flashlight. The figure extended a hand toward him, and Lucas felt his heart sink, realizing that this was not his brother, not truly. It was a twisted echo, a shadow held captive by something much darker. "Why did you leave me?" the figure asked, its voice a painful blend of accusation and sorrow. Lucas felt tears prick his eyes, guilt gnawing at his insides. He wanted to reach out, to take his brother's hand and bring him back, to make things right. But a terrible realization dawned on him. Whatever was offering him this chance was not interested in reconciliation. It was hungry, and it wanted a piece of his soul. In that moment, Lucas understood that he faced an impossible choice. The voice urged him to stay, to walk deeper into the darkness, promising that he would uncover the truth about Daniel's fate, that he could perhaps undo the past. But in exchange, he sensed a cost, a sacrifice. He could feel the shadows gnawing at his thoughts, memories slipping away as if his very essence was being siphoned. The forest demanded something in return for the answers he sought, an offering of himself, perhaps his sanity, or even a cherished memory. His mind reeled as he weighed his options. He could walk away, save himself and keep his grip on reality, but he would carry the unanswered questions for the rest of his life, haunted by the shadow of his brother. Or he could stay, risking his own soul to appease the forest, to glimpse the truth that lay hidden in the fog, and perhaps join Daniel in whatever dark afterlife had claimed him. The very thought of it chilled him to the core, yet he knew he was already far too deep in this nightmare to simply turn back. With a trembling breath, Lucas made his choice. He took a hesitant step forward, feeling the shadows pulse in anticipation, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Daniel." In that instant, the forest seemed to come alive, branches twisting toward him like eager claws, the fog thickening to swallow him whole. He closed his eyes, bracing for the unknown, knowing that he had offered himself to the darkness, hoping that whatever truth awaited him would be worth the price. As Lucas stepped deeper into the forest, the world around him seemed to shift and warp, as though he had crossed an invisible threshold into a realm far from reality. The trees stretched unnaturally tall, their twisted branches looming overhead like skeletal fingers, forming a canopy so dense it blocked out any hint of the moonlight. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, twisting into grotesque shapes that faded the moment he tried to focus on them. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, a silence so profound that it amplified every breath he took, every beat of his heart. And then, as he strained his ears, he heard it, a soft, eerie whisper that seemed to rise from the ground, slipping through the fog and wrapping around him like a cold, invisible hand. The whisper was faint, yet unmistakable, carrying an unearthly quality that sent shivers down his spine. It was Daniel's voice, but hollow, as if drained of life, a mere echo of the person he once knew. "Lucas, you came back. You finally came back," the voice murmured, its tone laced with both sorrow and malice, twisting his name into a mockery of affection. Lucas clutched the locket in his hand, its metallic chill grounding him, though he could feel a sinister energy pulsing from it, like a heartbeat out of sync with his own. The whisper grew louder, now emanating from all around him, filling the air with an insistent, rhythmic chant that echoed in his mind, urging him to go deeper, to surrender to the darkness that awaited him. He tried to ignore it, to block out the sound, but the forest itself seemed to breathe with the voice, each whisper weaving into the fog, luring him forward, drawing him further into the heart of its nightmarish embrace. As he took another cautious step, the ground beneath him seemed to shift, and he stumbled, nearly falling as his flashlight flickered. The light, weak and stuttering, cast strange, distorted shadows on the trees around him, making it look as though they were moving, creeping closer with every flicker. In one brief flash, he thought he saw a face among the branches, a pale, gaunt visage staring down at him with empty, hollow eyes. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of dread that gnawed at his mind. The whispers continued, growing sharper, more insistent, and Lucas could feel his resolve weakening. He was no longer certain if the voice was outside of him or if it had seeped into his very thoughts, corrupting them. His mind began to blur, his memories slipping away, as though the forest was feeding on them, erasing pieces of him with each step. He couldn't remember why he had come, only that he was searching, and that someone, was waiting for him. The only thing anchoring him to himself was the locket, now almost painfully cold against his chest, its weight a reminder of the brother he had lost. Then, he felt a presence, a cold, ghostly touch against his shoulder. He whipped around, but there was no one there, only the shifting shadows, which seemed to mock him, laughing in a silent, terrible way. But the touch remained, persistent, crawling along his skin as if unseen fingers were tracing his spine, drawing him further into the forest's depths. He wanted to scream, to break free from the unseen grip, but his voice was caught in his throat, as if the forest had stolen even that. Finally, the whispers became a single voice, low and menacing, filling his mind with words that seemed to burn into his thoughts. "You can't leave, Lucas. Not until you understand." His body moved almost involuntarily, drawn by the voice, each step heavy as though the ground itself was trying to pull him under. He stumbled forward, feeling as if he were falling into a dream, yet painfully aware of every terrifying moment. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw a figure lurking just beyond the trees, watching him. It was Daniel, or what was left of him, standing still, his hollow eyes staring, his face twisted into a haunting smile. Lucas wanted to look away, to flee, but the figure held him captive, its gaze rooting him to the spot. In that moment, he realized that whatever this apparition was, it was not his brother. It was something ancient, something dark, using Daniel's image to lure him deeper into the shadows. And as he looked into its hollow eyes, he felt the forest close in around him, each whisper echoing the same chilling promise. "You are ours now." Lucas moved through the forest in a trance, each step feeling heavier, as if invisible weights were bound to his ankles, dragging him down. The oppressive fog swirled around him, carrying voices, soft, mocking murmurs that seemed to echo his every fearful thought. His mind grew cloudy, disoriented, and his memories started to blur, as if the forest itself was devouring his past, feeding on the fragments of his identity. He tried to focus, to remember why he was here, but all he could feel was an insidious terror seeping into his bones, distorting his sense of reality. The trees seemed to shift in the corner of his vision, bending and twisting as though alive, as though they were conspiring to trap him. Shadows darted between them, fleeting yet unmistakable, just enough to fuel his growing paranoia. A cold sweat dripped down his back, and he gripped his flashlight tighter, feeling its slight warmth as a last tether to sanity. But the light was weak, barely piercing the darkness, and every time it flickered, he felt his heart seize. It was as if the forest was breathing, its dark energy rising and falling in time with his heartbeat, sinking with his own dread. Then, the whispers changed. They grew sharper, more defined, transforming into fragmented voices, taunting, accusatory, and all disturbingly familiar. He recognized one of them instantly, his mother's voice, speaking words she would never say. "You left him, Lucas. You let him disappear." Another voice, colder and dripping with disdain, sounded like his father, echoing from some dark recess of his mind. Weak, useless, just like him. Each word struck like a blade, the accusations stirring up every buried doubt and regret, dragging him further into a vortex of guilt and self-loathing. In his weakened state, the forest began to warp his vision. He could see Daniel's face in the mist, distorted and twisted, the empty, accusing eyes haunting him. As he blinked, Daniel's face disappeared, only to reappear moments later, closer, as if he were stepping out of the fog itself. The vision began to feel real, and Lucas struggled to remind himself it was a hallucination, a trick. But with every step, the fear clawed deeper into his mind, twisting his perception until he could barely distinguish between reality and nightmare. Lucas's legs grew weak, and he stumbled, falling to his knees on the damp, muddy ground. The whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of voices, all reminding him of his failures, his fears. Shadows coiled around him, writhing like dark tendrils, brushing against his skin with a cold that cut deeper than any winter chill. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if every hidden fear, every regret, was laid bare for the forest to consume. And then he heard it, a new voice, soft and alluring, whispering directly into his ear. It was a voice unlike the others, neither accusatory nor mocking, but rather tempting, coaxing him with a gentle menace. "You can be free of this, Lucas. Just let go. Embrace it. The fear. It doesn't have to hurt." The words wrapped around his mind, luring him into a seductive promise of relief. He could feel the weight of his fears lifting, replaced by a numbness that seemed almost comforting, as though the forest was offering him peace, an escape from the torment in exchange for his surrender. But as the numbness crept in, he felt something else, an emptiness, a void threatening to swallow his mind whole. He realized with horror that if he gave in, he would lose himself entirely. The forest would strip him of everything he was, every memory, every shred of his humanity, leaving only an empty shell to wander these cursed trails forever. Lucas recoiled, terror flooding back as he fought against the temptation, clinging desperately to his sanity, to the fragile remnants of his identity. The voices grew angry, the shadows pressing closer, their whispers turning to hisses, venomous and spiteful. "You can't resist, Lucas. You're already ours." The darkness swirled around him, seething with malevolence, and he could feel the forest's rage, its hunger for his fear, for his soul. With a final, desperate surge of willpower, he forced himself to stand, breaking free from the weight that tried to hold him down. His breaths came in shallow gasps, but he took a step forward, defying the forest, refusing to give in to the terror that clawed at his mind. As he moved, the voices faded, retreating into the shadows, but he knew they were not gone. The forest had tested him, tempted him with his deepest fears, and though he had resisted, he felt weakened, as if part of him had already been claimed. He walked on, aware that the forest was not done with him, that it would come again, with darker temptations, more insidious horrors, until there was nothing left of him to resist. Lucas stumbled through the thickening fog, his heart pounding violently against his ribs as if trying to escape the overwhelming fear that wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud. Each step forward felt like wading through treacle, every breath a battle against the oppressive darkness that sought to engulf him. The voices were quiet now, but their echoes lingered, whispering in the recesses of his mind, reminding him of what was at stake. He could feel the weight of his past pressing down on him, the memories of Daniel suffocating him with every heartbeat. As he trudged forward, the trees began to thin, revealing a clearing bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. It glimmered faintly, a strange glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Lucas hesitated at the edge, his instincts screaming at him to turn back, but the need to know, the desperate hunger for truth, propelled him into the open space. The clearing felt charged, alive with an unseen energy, and in the center, he saw a figure standing motionless, facing away from him, shrouded in shadow. "Daniel," he called, his voice trembling, barely above a whisper. The figure turned slowly, and Lucas felt a jolt of recognition mixed with dread. It was his brother, or at least the illusion of him. Daniel's face was gaunt and pale, his eyes hollow, devoid of life, yet filled with an unbearable sorrow. The sight was both a comfort and a torment, twisting the knife of grief deeper into Lucas's heart. "You came back for me," the figure said, its voice a chilling blend of familiarity and despair. "Where have you been? What happened to you?" Lucas took a step closer, desperate for answers, but terrified of what he might find. Daniel raised a hand, gesturing for him to come nearer, and the air around them seemed to crackle with tension. "I'm trapped, Lucas," he said, his voice shaking. "I need you to set me free." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of unspoken horrors, and Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean?" he stammered, trying to steady himself against the overwhelming flood of emotions. The shadow of Daniel seemed to shift and distort, flickering in and out of focus, as if the very essence of his brother was struggling to hold form. "You have to choose," the figure urged, its voice growing desperate, almost pleading. "You can save me, but you must pay the price. It's the only way." Lucas's heart raced as the realization struck him with a wave of terror. This was not merely a reunion. It was a trap, a sinister game being played by the dark forces that haunted this forest. The locket in his hand grew cold, and he could feel a pull towards the shadows lurking at the edge of the clearing, the very darkness that had claimed Daniel. "What price?" Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper. The fear of what he might have to sacrifice made him tremble, and he took another cautious step forward, his instinct screaming at him to run. Daniel's expression darkened, a flicker of something wicked passing across his face. "You must sacrifice a part of yourself," he said slowly, deliberately. "A memory, a piece of your soul. Only then can I be free." The implication sent a chill down Lucas's spine. The forest, the whispers, the shadows. They were feeding on his fear, on his grief. And now they demanded a payment for the truth. The choice loomed before him, heavy and foreboding. "What if I refuse?" Lucas asked, though deep down, he knew the answer. Daniel's form began to shimmer, fading like mist under the rising sun. "Then I will remain here, lost forever, just another soul trapped by this wretched place. You will carry the burden of my death with you, a weight that will crush you," the figure warned, its voice echoing with sorrow and regret. In that moment, the gravity of his decision crashed down on him like a wave. He could feel the forest watching, waiting for him to make a choice, the shadows creeping closer as they sensed his hesitation. His mind raced with memories, laughs shared, moments of joy, the day they climbed together, brotherly secrets whispered under the stars. He felt the warmth of those memories juxtaposed against the coldness of loss. But then he heard the whispers again, taunting him, feeding off his fear, reminding him of the pain that had lingered since that day. If he let Daniel go, would he be free? Or would he be haunted by the memory of a brother lost, forever wondering what could have been? With a heavy heart, Lucas took a deep breath. And in that breath, he felt the weight of every choice he had ever made, every regret, and every sorrow coalescing into a single moment. "I choose to save you, Daniel," he declared, but as the words left his lips, a deep sense of dread washed over him. "But I will not lose myself in the process." The air around him crackled with energy, and Daniel's figure flickered violently, the shadows swirling around them as if the forest itself were protesting his choice. "No!" the specter screamed, but Lucas stood firm, feeling the darkness clawing at his mind, demanding his surrender. In that moment of chaos, Lucas felt a surge of determination. He closed his eyes and focused on the memories that defined him, the warmth of family, the laughter of childhood, the love they shared. He would not sacrifice them. Instead, he would confront the darkness head-on, refusing to be a pawn in its game. As the shadows writhed around him, Lucas stepped forward, not into the darkness, but towards the light of his memories. He would find a way to save Daniel without losing himself. The clearing erupted in a violent rush of energy, the echoes of the past colliding with the present as Lucas prepared for the ultimate confrontation, knowing that the truth he sought lay just beyond the veil of terror. The air in the clearing thickened, pulsating with an energy that felt both alive and dead, a contradiction that made Lucas's skin crawl. Shadows writhed around him, stretching and twisting as if they were sentient, grasping at his legs and pulling him down into the depths of the darkness that surrounded the clearing. Daniel's figure flickered and faltered, the connection between them taut with tension. It felt as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling, leaving only an abyss where light and hope once existed. "Let go, Lucas." Daniel's voice came through the cacophony of whispers and hisses that swirled in the fog. "You don't understand. It's the only way to save me." The shadows encroached, and Lucas could feel the malevolent force pushing against him, probing at his mind, searching for a weakness, a fear to exploit. He could see the landscape shifting around him, the trees leaning in closer, their gnarled branches forming grotesque faces that leered at him with hollow eyes. The air was thick with the scent of decay and despair, a noxious reminder of the fate that awaited him if he succumbed. "No," Lucas shouted, his voice echoing defiantly against the encroaching darkness. "I won't let you take me. I won't sacrifice myself to save you." His heart raced as he fought against the pulling force, determined to retain his memories, his sense of self. He had come here seeking answers, seeking closure, but what he found was a prison of shadows and lies. As he stood his ground, the darkness responded with a wrathful roar, an inhuman sound that reverberated through the trees, causing the very ground beneath him to tremble. The shadows writhed and coiled, rising to form a massive, indistinct figure, a monstrosity of twisted limbs and empty eyes, its presence radiating pure malevolence. The entity loomed over him, dark and formless, an embodiment of every fear and regret he had ever harbored. He extended an arm towards him, fingers elongated and claw-like, reaching for Lucas with a hunger that made him recoil. "Give in to the darkness," it howled, its voice a chorus of the damned, echoing with the memories of those who had come before him. "Join us, and you shall be free of your pain." The offer hung heavy in the air, seductive yet repulsive. Lucas could feel its weight pressing down on him, inviting him to relinquish his memories, to forget the pain of loss and the burden of regret. It promised him solace, a sweet release from the torment that had plagued him since that day. But as the shadows closed in, Lucas found strength in his fear. He remembered Daniel not as a lost soul, but as a brother, a protector, a friend. The memories flooded back with vivid clarity. The laughter shared, the dreams they had forged together, the warmth of brotherhood that had once lit up his life. "You are not my brother," he screamed, channeling every ounce of emotion into his voice, defiance igniting a fire within him. "You are a lie. You are nothing but a monster." The figure hesitated, a flicker of confusion momentarily disrupting its terrifying form. Seizing the moment, Lucas took a step forward, drawing upon the light of his memories, and thrust the locket towards the entity. "You will not take my brother from me. I remember who he was, and I refuse to let you twist that into something dark." The locket glowed faintly in response, shimmering with the warmth of the memories it contained. In that moment, the entity roared in rage, the shadows recoiling as if burned by the light. Lucas felt a surge of energy course through him, igniting a spark of hope as the locket pulsed with the essence of his memories. "I will not succumb to your darkness. I will not allow you to destroy the love I have for my brothers." The clearing was filled with a brilliant light, pushing back against the shadows, illuminating the twisted forms of the trees and the dark presence that loomed before him. The dark figure writhed in agony, its form flickering and losing shape, as if it were being pulled apart by an unseen force. "No, you cannot fight me," it screeched, the voices of the damned mingling with its own, creating a symphony of despair. But Lucas stood firm, refusing to waver in his conviction. The light continued to swell, brightening the clearing until the shadows were nothing but a distant memory, their grip on his mind shattering like glass. In that climactic moment, Lucas felt the bond between him and Daniel rekindle, an energy that surged through the air, connecting them even in this fractured realm. "Daniel, come back to me," he shouted, pouring his heart into the plea, as the locket glowed brighter still, casting away the darkness that had claimed his brother for too long. The shadows erupted, dissipating into nothingness, and the monstrous figure screamed in fury as it was consumed by the light. The clearing pulsed with energy, the very air vibrating as the darkness was expelled, banished from the realm they had inhabited. Lucas felt the warmth of his brother's spirit embrace him, a gentle touch that filled the space once occupied by fear and despair. As the light dimmed, the clearing settled into a serene calm, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Daniel stood before him, not as a shadowy echo, but as the brother Lucas had lost, alive, vibrant, and whole. "You did it," he said, tears shining in his eyes. "You freed me." But as Lucas reached for Daniel, a strange stillness fell over the clearing. The truth was still looming, an uncertainty that reminded him of the sacrifice he had made. They had triumphed over the darkness, but at what cost? As Daniel's form shimmered and began to fade, Lucas understood that the battle was won, but the war against the shadows would continue, lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for another chance to ensnare a wandering soul. As the light from the clearing faded, Lucas stood alone in the aftermath of the confrontation, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was still, the once oppressive atmosphere now replaced by an eerie silence that wrapped around him like a shroud. Daniel had vanished, his presence lingering like a faint echo, leaving Lucas with an overwhelming sense of both loss and relief. He had freed his brother from the clutches of darkness, but the emptiness that followed felt profound and haunting, like a wound that would never fully heal. The clearing, now devoid of the monstrous shadows that had once threatened to consume him, felt different. The trees, once twisted and ominous, stood tall and silent, their bark smooth and lifeless, as if they had absorbed the terror that had unfolded. But something about the space remained unsettling, a lingering chill that clung to the air, whispering secrets only the forest could understand. Lucas glanced around, half expecting the darkness to surge back, to reclaim what it had lost. As he took a step back, the ground beneath him felt softer, almost yielding, as if the earth were mourning the battle that had just transpired. He felt a pull, an invisible thread connecting him to the place where he had fought so hard. A flicker of movement caught his eye, and he turned sharply, peering into the depths of the trees. There, just beyond the edge of the clearing, a figure stood watching him, a silhouette barely visible in the gloom. "Who's there?" Lucas called out, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his insides. The figure remained motionless, its shape indistinct, cloaked in shadow. He could feel his heart racing, the familiar terror creeping back as he recalled the way the darkness had twisted and turned, morphing into grotesque forms. Was it possible that the entity had returned, or was this something new, a remnant of the forest's dark power? As the figure stepped forward, the light from the clearing illuminated a face, but it was not Daniel's. Instead, it was a stranger, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to drink in the light, and a look of despair etched across their features. "You should not have come here," the stranger said, their voice a hoarse whisper that sent shivers racing down Lucas's spine. "You've awakened something ancient, something that cannot be contained." "What do you mean?" Lucas demanded, stepping back, instinctively raising his flashlight as if it could protect him from the malevolence that seemed to thrum in the air. "I freed my brother." The strangers shook their head, a sorrowful expression haunting their face. "You've done more than that. You've stirred the forest's hunger. The darkness will always find a way back. It thrives on fear, and now it knows you." A cold dread seeped into Lucas's bones, the implications of the stranger's words crashing over him like a wave. "What are you saying?" he stammered, feeling the remnants of courage slipping away. The forest had not just been a place of healing, it had been a predator, biding its time until the right moment to strike. "There are others like me, who were once drawn into this place, lured by the promise of solace," the stranger continued, their voice trembling. "But the truth is, it feeds on us, on our pain and sorrow. We become nothing but whispers in the shadows." They gestured toward the trees, where the darkness seemed to pulse, alive with malevolent energy, an endless expanse of unknown horrors. "You may have escaped, but you cannot run from what you've awakened." Lucas felt a surge of panic rising in his throat. The relief he had felt moments ago began to dissolve, replaced by a chilling realization that his victory had only opened a door to greater horrors. He glanced back at the clearing, where he had fought so hard to save Daniel, and he wondered if that had truly been the end. "What can I do?" he asked, desperation tinging his voice. How can I stop it? The stranger's expression softened with empathy, but the sorrow remained. You must remember what you've lost, but you cannot dwell in it. You need to find the strength to confront the shadows that linger in your mind. Only then can you keep them at bay. They paused, glancing back at the forest, fear flickering in their eyes. But know this: the darkness is patient. It will wait for a moment of weakness to strike. As Lucas stood there, contemplating the weight of the stranger's words, he felt the forest shift around him, the shadows lengthening and curling like hungry serpents. He turned to leave, the cold grip of dread tightening around his heart, but the voice of the stranger echoed behind him, a final warning. You are never truly free. The mystery of the lost will haunt you, and the shadows will always call your name. With every step away from the clearing, Lucas felt the eyes of the forest upon him, an omnipresent awareness that filled him with a sense of foreboding. He could sense the darkness swirling in the distance, lurking just beyond the periphery of his vision. The journey had changed him irrevocably, and while he had liberated Daniel, he had also awakened a deeper fear within himself, a fear of the unknown, of the lingering shadows that would forever whisper his name, reminding him that the mystery of what lay in the darkness was far from over. The battle may have been won, but the war against the shadows had only just begun.